Good day, good day. It's Elaine Lindsay of True Social Media and host of BBPTV show. I'm here today with an amazing guest. I'm very excited and thrilled to present to you because I only met him last month. In October, I was speaking in Ireland and had the privilege of visiting with Mervyn Greene. Hello.
Hello there. How are you doing?
I'm good. I probably will, as usual, talk everybody's ear off, but I do have to say we were given the opportunity to go through Mervyn's building. It's called the CHQ, and we're going to talk about that. But more importantly, we also went to the Irish Emigration Museum. Also, thanks to Mervyn, and Dogpatch Labs. We're going to touch on all these things, but I just have to tell you, get yourself to Ireland, get to Dublin, and this is where you need to start. I am of Irish heritage. I come from Scotland, as many people know, and I have to tell you, it was so uplifting to go see this museum because I tell you, it's very different. Now, I'm going to be quiet. Mervyn, that's a whole lot for me to throw at you. Start wherever you want. Whether we start at CHQ, start at the museum, you choose.
Well, I think it makes sense to start at the building, and it's a privilege to work on the building. I'm going to talk a little bit, just 4 or 5 minutes about the building itself, because it in itself has importance. Yes. So the story is, it was built between 1817 and 1820, and it's one of the most important industrial Georgian buildings in Dublin. And it was a customs warehouse. It's a massive, massive building. Yeah. Two elements of it. It's the size of a football stadium, essentially, 155 yards long and 55 yards wide. It's a single story above ground, which is where tobacco would have been stored in its heyday. And then there are 9 amazing brick and stone vaults underneath, exactly the same size. And each of those 9 vaults is now occupied with restaurants, with Ireland's nicest gym, and of course, as you mentioned, the Irish Emigration Museum, which opened in 2016. So those vaults, the historical version or the usage of those vaults would have been to store spirits. Now, 2 things that you need to know. It was the biggest building built in Ireland at its time, and there was no wood used because of the flammable nature of its contents, meant that they used non-flammable materials. Right. And it has a very historical place in Irish construction and, in fact, British construction history, because the cast iron that is used to support the roof is of a brand new, at the time, methodology which allowed tensile strength. It allowed a greater tensile strength, and therefore you started getting some beauty involved. And you can have a look at, if anybody visits, go look upstairs. The cast iron has not been touched, apart from being cleaned and painted, for 200 years, and it is still fit for purpose. Now, the background is that essentially the Irish government restored the building in the early 2000s. They spent many tens of millions of euros making an absolutely unbelievable restoration job. But the agency that owned it got into a bit of financial difficulty when there was a property crash. And my older brother, who some of your listeners and viewers will have heard of, is a man called Neville Isdell. He's an Irishman who ended up heading up Coca-Cola globally, which is an amazing achievement for an Irish person, if you think about that. He was an immigrant. He emigrated to Africa as a young man, a young boy, in fact, and then subsequently worked all over the world. He worked in 5 continents and 11 countries. And between 2004 and 2009, he was the chairman and chief executive of what I suspect is the world's greatest brand still, Coca-Cola, based in Atlanta, and will have had an amazing career. And one of the things that he wanted to do in 2013 or so was to make a property investment in Dublin. And he and I essentially found the empty CHQ building at that time, and we bought it from the agency that had essentially got into financial difficulties.
Right.
Nobody in Ireland wanted to buy the building for what we thought it was worth. And as you can imagine, a lot of people thought that we were very foolish. But I think the fact that we were not property developers and that we came at this in a completely different, very long-term way will have helped us. Now, I'm a civil engineer originally, so I understood the building, I understood the conservation.
Yeah.
And between the two of us, we have, over the last 4 years, made a number of changes to the building and brought in tenants. We brought in food, we brought in restaurants, we've brought in Dogpatch Labs, which you referred to, and obviously we've also launched Epic recently. Now there's more work to be done, but what's happened is the area, that particular building has now come back to life.
Yeah.
It is now busier than it has been for perhaps 150 years.
Yeah.
And it is becoming a cultural, a food, and a technical and innovation center in that part of Dublin. For those of you who are new to Dublin, the area we're in is called the International Financial Services Centre. It's a very modern part of Dublin, and yet you have this amazing, iconic, and very precious building preserved beautifully in the middle, and it is becoming the cultural hub, the food hub of the area, and is providing now services to all of the people who work in the neighborhood or those who live in the neighborhood. And you will remember from your visit recently, you'll see a lot of cranes. The number of people within walking distance of our building is going to double in the next 3 years as more apartment blocks are built, as more dwellings are built, as more offices are built, and as shops come in, retail units, hotels, you name it, that obviously are going to service a very large increase in the population of this eastern part of Dublin.
Yeah.
So the underlying story here is that Neville financed the purchase of that building, essentially, took a risk, and the beauty of it, and this is a very, very good lesson here, where the government did what the government's good at, which is to restore a building because it's worth restoring, as opposed to worrying about the commercial return.
Yeah.
And then partly not necessarily a choice, but they basically then put it out into the private sector, where people with entrepreneurial ability and the ability to make things happen quickly, took over the building and have now started the process. We're sort of 4 years into what I think is going to be a 7-year project. And when we started, 20% of the area in the building was used by various tenants. That's now 75%. So there's still some work to be done, but we are generating tens of thousands of people a week coming through the building, hundreds of thousands of people a month coming through and using the services and the products that are provided by the building on a daily basis.
I just want to be sure that the audience understands the significance of this particular building. It's about the span of the beams?
Yes, what had happened was in the late 1700s, British iron foundries had started to make different formulations of cast iron.
Right.
And around about the late 1790s, they happened on a formulation that had what is called higher tensile strength. So that meant that you could effectively widen the gap between the pillars. In the previously, pillars or columns had been made of wood. They were limited by the size of trees, and it was like a forest of pillars that was holding up various buildings and rooms, and the gaps between the support were much, much smaller than they were able to do. So there's an area called Tobacco Dock in Dublin, or in London, that had similar warehouses. And we believe that at the time that our building was built, the span, which is 38 feet and some inches, was in fact the widest span between columns at that time.
Right.
Okay. Just after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Battle of Waterloo had been 1815. There was peace between Britain and France. Obviously, Ireland at that point was part of the United Kingdom, Great Britain. So we had a boom. Port activity was increasing, and there was a need for more docks, for more warehouses. So they essentially, a man called John Rennie did the design, and he was an engineer and an architect, and used this British formulation of cast iron and experimented with it in a way that was at the time unique. And we think we're in the process of undertaking an academic piece of research. We think that at the time the building was built, it may have been the widest span of the time. We believe very, very firmly that it's the oldest known use of this cast iron. So that's our belief at the moment. And we would like to prove that. And if we prove that, we will be asking UNESCO's World Heritage Department to essentially put a preservation order on the building for the next 200 years as well.
And to that end, what I found most fascinating, when we were looking at the beams, I know there are a couple of areas that have been, I'm sorry, not an engineer, but shored up, if you will. And you very kindly explained to me that you definitely went to the trouble of making sure that the cast iron was not damaged in any way, and the some additional support or what have you was done in a way to help without changing the cast iron at all.
That's correct. And in fact, the council, who are the people that provide us with the permission to change things in the building, are very, very, they love the building just as much as we do. And there's a strong sense between the planning and conservation departments in our local council and ourselves. We are definitely on the same page. We have a full-time conservation architect who loves the building as much as I do, whose job it is to protect it. And what I showed you was where we were, let's say, we have to put in sprinkler systems for health and safety and fire preservation. What you normally do is you drill a hole and you essentially just hang a bracket from it, and then you hang the piping from that bracket. In our case, we actually designed clamps that would clamp onto the superstructure and then hang down, so they can be taken off. One of the principles of conservation is you must be able to remove what you've done without affecting the original underlying structure.
Right.
And that's very, very important. It adds cost, it adds time, it adds complexity, but certainly it is absolutely worth doing. And if we have a tenant who is coming into the building, our conservation architect supervises anything that they do that deals with what is called a historic fabric. Right. Very, very important. There's a duty of care.
Yeah.
You know, Neville is in his mid-70s. I'm in my late 50s. We won't be around in 2050. We won't be around in 2150, but the building will.
Yes, yes, it will.
Yeah. And so there's a legacy element and there's a handing it on. So it's very, very important. Now, it does add costs, but for us, the important thing there is that there's the return on investment there is that the building lives on in all its glory.
Absolutely, and your love for the building was so evident when we were going through. You were like a proud papa with his son, showing off all the things that he could do. It is humongous. It is, like, think of a football field, the whole stadium. It's all there, and it has a real airiness to it. I guess because of all the glass, it really felt very open, very inviting. And something that you told me, I believe, is about the port of Dublin actually moved later.
That's right. What would happen is in the early 1820s, boats were quite skinny. They were small and smaller than they were in the middle of the century. And the river there is quite wide, but the dock that would have been used to unload the cargoes, the entrance into that dock is a bit like a canal.
Yeah.
And that entrance was quite narrow. So within about 30 years or so, so roughly 1850 or so, the boats had gotten bigger and bigger as construction techniques had improved. And clearly there was more commercial to have one ship sailing at twice the size, etc., with the same crew. So when they couldn't get the bigger ships through the various dock entrances into the unloading dock.
Right.
So, of course, what then happened was the port started moving east. It's now about a mile away from where CHQ is. Its original name was Stack A, actually. Oh. But Stack, and it was called Stack because you stacked the various bits of cargo up. Yeah. And what happened was cargo stayed there for only a few days. It was unloaded. The owner of it showed up. They paid their import or customs duty, excise. They were then given a piece of paper, and then they could load up their horse and cart, essentially, with their whiskey, with their wine, with their tobacco, with whatever goods that they were customable at that stage. And then off they went. So it probably had, as its original use, something like 30 to 35 years. Now, there were ways to store, it was used as a storage unit, but essentially the ships, as they got bigger, moved further and further east. And as you now know, they're container ships that are hundreds of meters long, and they dock a mile and a half away from where, I think it's worth just reminding your listeners, those who are perhaps not Dubliners or visitors of Dublin, what I think is one of the most beautiful buildings in Dublin is 200 yards away, and that's the Customs House.
Yes.
Which was built in 1791 by James Gandon. It's a masterpiece. And the good news is that, again, it's owned by one of the government agencies, the OPW, and they have plans to open it up to the public more and to bring it more into use, because they're starting to see traffic. People are starting to move from the city centre in Dublin, which is only 6 or 7 minutes walk away. Yeah. So let me just put in, you're in absolutely close to the city centre, in what was an unfashionable Docklands area, but is now becoming, and Epic is contributing massively, a hub for tourist activity or for visitors. And for, if you could be as much of a tourist living, I live in Cork, so you could be up from Cork for the rugby match or the football match or the hurling. And of course, that's a lovely area to be a visitor into. So we're 6 or 7 minutes walk from the northern part of Trinity College,
right,
one road away, and from O'Connell Bridge, which is the main bridge across the Liffey, we are about 7 or 8 minutes walk. You can walk to Grafton Street, which is the main shopping area, in 15 or 20 minutes. And Dublin is a very easy city to walk around in. It's very flat, it's quite small and compact. So actually, when we say to people we're in the city centre, and they don't believe me if they're not familiar with the building.
Yeah.
And suddenly when they come to visit, they go, well, are you 10 minutes early? Yeah, but I didn't think it only took me 5 minutes to come from Trinity. And I go, I told you, didn't I? Yep. So we're actually in a fantastic location. We have our own Lewis stop. And the Lewis is now getting joined up. So there's a program in place that will start next month where there's to be 2 Lewis lines. Now they will now be integrated together. So
okay, I'm going to stop you for a second, because we do have international viewers. Please explain what the
Lewis. Yeah. Very good. The Lewis is very simply our internal public tram system. So it's a modern version of the trams that you would have in San Francisco, for example, with electronic overhead lines, and it essentially runs on train tracks that you would be used to. So again, when Neville purchased the building, we already knew that the Lewis would be joining up.
Good.
So we knew that when you're doing something with property, location is obviously the very, very key driver.
Oh yeah.
So we knew what was going to happen with regard to the Lewis itself. The Lewis we knew what was going to happen with the building that was going to go on all around us. With, I mean, most of the growth of Dublin's commercial centre is happening around us, within a couple of 100 yards of our building. So, as I said, there's one anecdote I just want to close on. I think we're probably finished with CHQ after this. But the southern end of the building is a massive glass wall. We've been told it's the single largest window in Dublin, a very, very innovative structure. And it was designed by a company called RFR, which is a structural engineering company that's based in Paris. And it was set up by a very famous Irishman called Peter Rice, who was an acolyte of Ove Arup, that most people will have heard of as a famous structural engineer. Ove Arup said that Peter Rice was the most important structural engineer of the 20th century. He was the man who figured out how to build the Sydney Opera House.
Right.
He built the Pompidou Centre. He built La Défense in Paris. He built the Louvre, all the modern elements of the Louvre, including the pyramid. And as an engineer, and I know this is going to sound a little bit nerdy, but architects generally get their names associated with buildings, but in a lot of cases, Peter Rice's name should really be associated with some of his buildings, including the Pompidou Centre, because it was not necessarily the designer who should take all of the credit, because in a lot of the cases, they did not know how to build the building from the design, and they had to, in the case of the Sydney Opera House, they had to invent some construction techniques in order to get that particular building up. So Peter Rice, there's a very nice link. Peter Rice is one of the heroes that we talk about in EPIC, the Irish Emigration Museum, and rightly so.
Oh, what a nice segue. And I'm just going to insert here also on BBPTV on the website, we will have all of the links, and there will be images, because I don't think I stopped taking pictures the entire time I was with you, Mervyn. I was constantly snapping photos. It was such a phenomenal experience. The last thing before you leave the building, it's not far. Is it called the Harp Bridge?
Oh, that is called the Beckett Bridge, named after Samuel Beckett. Okay. Yes. We have a little bridge in front of us, which is called the Sean O'Casey, which is a pedestrian bridge. And then roughly, I suppose it must be about 500 or 600 yards away, there's, as you rightly say, it's the Harp Bridge. Yeah. And that bridge is starting to become one of the iconic images of Dublin. Mm-hmm. And it's, again, this is another civil engineering, and I'm definitely going in directions I don't normally go in, because no one's very normally interested. But that bridge is an astonishing piece of engineering as well, and it is beautiful. It really is. The word iconic is sometimes overused, but that is becoming a bit like the front gate of Trinity, a little bit like the Customs House. That bridge is becoming one of the 3 or 4 pictures that when you look at it, you instantly know you're in Dublin.
You're in Dublin, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And for our international viewers, I understand that bridge was actually floated there.
That's what I believe, and in fact, when I'm in Dublin, I live in a flat on the south side of the river, so that's the way I would walk home. And sometimes I will deliberately hang around when I realize that they're opening the bridge, because that in itself, which they do twice or 3 times a month, they do it at sort of 10 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, which is when I might be going home, and it's actually almost a tourist spectacle for those who are interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah. I guess I'm a little nerdy myself.
Yeah, no, we've done the people who put some of the infrastructure in place have done a really good job recently. There's a fantastic picture, an image for some of your visitors when they come. Go on to the Beckett Bridge, and there's an amazing picture you can take of what we call our CCD, which is the Convention Centre Dublin, which is, again, a very unique looking building. and you can juxtapose the picture of the bridge and the CCD, and that is becoming a big iconic image for what is becoming. Dublin used to be a kind of grimy and not very interesting city. I think it's starting to, well, I think that's, we're taking care of it as it grows. We're taking care of it very, very well. There's a new central bank, which I think is a very pretty building, and that's on our side of the river. It's about 3/4 of a mile away from us, so a short walk essentially. And again, that's a beautiful building sitting there, and the construction activity around that building is now it's fierce, as they say.
Oh yeah, there's an awful lot going on just as we came up to CHQ. Everywhere you look, there were cranes and construction, and very bustling, very busy.
Right. I mean, anecdotally, and again, just for your viewers, 19 of the top 20 software firms, technology firms in the world, most of which are American, obviously, are headquartered in Dublin, and most of them within short walk of CHQ Building. Facebook, Google. We'll talk a little bit about Google's role with Dogpatch Labs. They're a huge partner in Dogpatch. You know, we're talking Ancestry.com, which is, and also FindMyPast.ie, which are genealogy databases, which again, we have a link with. You know, you can name just about any of the well-known brand names, LinkedIn, Twitter, Skype and Microsoft. All of those organizations have their European headquarters in that area of Dublin, and that area is becoming called Silicon Docks.
Good. I'm glad we got there, and I'm thinking that perhaps we should talk about Dogpatch Labs first, because that'll be shorter, and then we can really spend time on the museum.
Absolutely. Dogpatch Labs started in about 2009 in Dogpatch, which is, many of you will know, is a suburb of San Francisco. And it was what was called a discovery platform for a venture capital company called Polaris, which is an American venture capital company that specialized in technology companies. So in those days, co-working spaces were not as popular as they are today. So the venture capital company set up their own, and then anybody that they invested in was invited to come in and become part of their community. As there was another Dogpatch Labs, I think in New York, either New York or Boston, I can't remember offhand. And then the third Dogpatch Labs opened in Dublin as part of this American venture capital company's expansion overseas. So there was a small version of Dogpatch Labs, we'll call it 1.0, version 1.0. And that was located in Silicon Docks from 2009 onwards. A young man came into me in 2014 and with an idea for a co-working space. And at the same time, the original Dogpatch Labs was being forced to close because the building that it was inhabiting was going to essentially stop taking tenants. It was going to be redeveloped. So we put two and two together. We managed to essentially persuade Polaris and some of the investors in the Polaris funds that we would take Dogpatch on. And Neville and I bought into the idea, and we partnered with this young man whose name is Patrick Walsh. And we created, so Patrick and I essentially have created a new version of Dogpatch Labs, which we're calling 2.0. And that is now based in roughly 40,000 square feet of the CHQ building. It's on 3 stories. It has a vault of beautiful meeting rooms and a seminar room, which are, as we talked about earlier, beautifully restored.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Then there's a ground floor area, which is the bulk of where what we call members sit. Basically, we are what's called a scaling space. There are roughly 50 companies represented there, ranging from 2-man bands, essentially, all the way up to a company. We have a 126, I think, in fact, 46 person company, which is called Pivotal, which is a subsidiary of a big American software firm based in San Francisco. So there's a very, very clear strategy, which is to create a community. Now, the business model there is a lot of accelerators or startup incubators take an ownership stake in the business. We don't do that.
No.
We simply charge by the desk, by the month. But if you can start out with 2 desks, you can grow rapidly to 4, you can go to 6, you can go to 8, and you only pay for the number of desks that you use.
Yeah.
So that's very important. We also have part-time members. They could be based in other parts of Ireland or overseas, or they may not want to be there permanently. They may also have an office elsewhere. So, and we essentially, it's so many €100 per month per person, etc., with a discount if you are a part-time user. It's essentially a 50% discount if you're just using the space part-time. We also have a floor and what we call the mezzanine, which is called the urban garden, which is open. It's part of the building. It's open to the elements. You can get very close to those beautiful tie bars and roof structures that we talked about earlier. And we have somewhere in the region of 350 to 400 people using this space now every day. And it is just being announced by Google that we are their #1 co-working partner in the world.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Yeah. So for us, you know, we tend to be self-effacing in Ireland. We tend to be modest, but I'm boasting about that because Google is such an amazing company. So for us to be their #1 partner, if you are a dog patcher, you can go to one of somewhere in the region of 30 other Google partners all over the world, Paris, San Francisco, London, you name it, and you flash your membership card from Dogpatch, and you can then essentially hot desk in there for as long as you want for free. It's a reciprocal relationship.
Wow.
So we get people in from London, from San Francisco, from Tel Aviv, from Shenzhen, from Hong Kong, you name it, Berlin, Paris. They come, and then they become part of our community for the week that they are in Dublin.
Right.
So there's a huge number of events going on. The partnership with Google, essentially we take care of a lot of their community events. We run them on behalf of Google. Big diversity agenda in there. There's not enough women working in technology. Ireland's getting better. We have good STEM or science, technology, engineering, and maths programs. Girls tend to do better in their exams in Ireland, so we're starting to see the confidence growing among the girls that they can be mathematicians, computer scientists, engineers, game designers, you name it.
And you do, in fact, have at least one of the companies in Dogpatch. One of the startups is run by a woman, correct?
Oh, there's a huge number. There's 5 or 6, yeah. And in fact, if we see a technology company that has a woman co-founder or founder, woman managing director, or a woman chief technology officer or CTO, we will almost always invite them in because they are essentially a huge part of the diversity of the community. So now, we still need to make sure that they are a viable business, that they're going to go places, and generally that isn't an issue. That is not an issue, really. But we would be, I'm not going to say positively discriminating, but we are positively interested in that scenario. And that's a very, very important part of Google's mission, our mission. And we have a number of other partners in Dogpatch. There's Ulster Bank on the fintech side. They're one of the 3 largest banks in Ireland. Very innovative, very entrepreneurial. Suits us with our entrepreneurial startup and innovation agenda. Another very important partner for us, obviously the original partnership is between Dogpatch Labs and CHQ itself.
Yes. Google
is a massive partner. We have a very, very strong partnership with Unilever, which everybody will have heard of on the FMCG side, fast-moving consumer goods. There's a partnership with our local power distributor, which is called the Electricity Supply Board, or ESB. They're looking at smart ways of managing energy use. And we would have just done a huge project with them where they replaced all of the light fittings in the building, changed them from very high energy usage halogen or incandescent lamps to LEDs. I hope I'm right here, but I think our power usage has gone down about 66%.
Wow.
2/3,
What's
which is
that?
amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is fantastic for us. We need to talk about Alltech as well. Alltech is an Irish success story. It's a private business. It's in agricultural commodities and food production and agricultural technology, as well as brewing and distilling. Generally trying to be innovative about ways of doing that. We run accelerators and other programs for them. So that's the main partnerships. Sorry, the one other company called Pivotal, they're our biggest success story growth-wise. They started out with one man about a year ago, and now there's 60 people, and
Wow.
they're revolutioning the way that technology and data management and data mining is being done all over Europe. And
Wow.
they're headquartered in Cork, actually essentially owned by Dell at the highest level. There's a company called EMC below Dell. And then Pivotal are essentially the software development arm of this monster technology company. So huge opportunities for us. Government are very, very, very supportive of Dogpatch, I have to say. We've had visits from most of the cabinets, the trade and industry, the innovation people. There was a minister for fintech called Simon Harris. He was in the building quite a lot, trying to learn how these companies worked. And our present Taoiseach, who's Leah Varadkar, is a great fan of both CHQ, of EPIC, and very importantly, given he's a relatively young man to be our Prime Minister, 38 years old. So he gets technology more than the average, I think, and is essentially hugely supportive of everything that we do. Have to give Google a big shout out. They genuinely care. They've got a commercial mission, absolutely, but they understand that comes with responsibilities as well as priorities. And I have to say that they are massively supportive of the things that are going on in Dublin and in Ireland as a whole, and certainly in terms of what we're trying to do in Dogpatch with our agenda to help companies. One last piece on that is it's very important for viewers to understand. Around about 20% of our desks are these corporate partnerships where people start to relax and start to sort of free themselves of the suit and tie, and what is a much more corporate decision-making process tends to drop away. There's a cultural shift that happens in some of these organizations when they come in, because essentially they're coming out of a corporate environment into a much more entrepreneurial and let's get stuff done attitude. The other 80% is roughly evenly split between mostly American multinationals who are now setting up in Ireland. So they are very mature companies, but they are immature with regard to Dublin and Ireland.
Right.
And the other half of that is relatively immature Irish companies who actually know how to operate in Ireland and how to operate in Dublin. Huge amount of collaboration between both sides of that. The Irish companies learn some ambition, how to scale, how to grow faster, how to essentially set up in America, how to finance themselves, all the things the American companies have been through that particular phase. So there's an enormous opportunity for cross-fertilization, and we're very careful with what we call our curation. The companies and the individuals that come in need to be adding some value to the community.
Yeah.
Not just essentially grabbing a desk in a place that's convenient to work in and not essentially contributing anything. So as I said, Dogpatch is probably, at the moment, we're the biggest co-working space in Dublin. A company called WeWork is about to open up. They'll be bigger than us. But they're not necessarily as focused on, they're much more of a serviced office. And they're not as focused on the programs, they're not as focused on the American companies, not as focused on growing and the community. So we believe that we will have a reason for those who need that to remain with Dogpatch going forward. But of course, co-working spaces in America are relatively mature now.
Yeah.
It has become a new way of working. And, you know, there's a lot of evidence that says it's very productive for the millennials, not necessarily for my age group, who find it a little bit difficult to be open plan and to be overhearing conversations and things like that. You know, we're brought up in days when you had your own office. In my case, I used to work for Morgan Stanley, so I was on a trading floor.
Oh.
So I got quite used to that sort of hubbub and noise and the proximity of people. You do get used to it quite quickly. So for me, it's not a big cultural shock. But if you've been used to the corner office and a PA outside, there was definitely a shock coming.
Yeah.
As companies move away from that model.
Yeah, it's definite culture shock.
So Dogpatch is very important. We wear what's called a green jersey in Dogpatch. What that means is we think part of our job is to help Irish startups. Yes. So there's a mission in there, and there's a commercial, obviously hard-nosed commercial business at the core of it. But we managed to do a lot of the right things in the right way. And for me, that's part of sustainable and connecting ways of working, so that what you put in, you get out, basically.
Well, we took a tour of Dogpatch, and again, it's pretty big.
Yes.
And they have a lovely elevator, I can say. But it was really nice to see some of the different spaces. So interesting, the vaults downstairs. What an incredible place to have your event. So I can see part of why Google would be interested in the space, never mind everything else. But I did find there was a hum of excitement underlying everything everyone was doing. It was nice. You can go into some offices and even collaborative spaces where everything's kind of toned down. There was life. To me, it felt very alive, very, very active. Not that it was noisy, because it really wasn't. It was actually relatively quiet, but it was nice to see that many people all working sort of side by side, not necessarily together. And I know that the culture is very open, as you said, and everybody has their space, but there's no big walls or big barriers. It's actually very refreshing.
I think that's good, and I think one of the things that we've been successful with, and there are a couple of ladies who are responsible for, I'm going to say, energizing the culture, because enforcement would be the wrong way, because generally it's peer enforcement, really.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of an unwritten series of rules. You don't have loud conversations at your desk. You don't take personal phone calls at your desk. We have little phone booths that you can pop into, and you can talk to your 8-year-old daughter who's just fallen over and hurt her knee, etc. And you can have that private conversation, but you don't essentially inflict that on others, etc. And when I generally take people around on tours, I try to do it when it's lunchtime or something like that, so I don't impose myself. Or if it does happen during working hours, then I'll talk where it's appropriate, and then I'll walk around relatively quietly, and not disturb people, etc. You know, they're not there to be, they're not sort of zoo animals to be, etc. So we are careful about that. People generally, if they have a coffee, and because there's beer in the fridge, there's wine in the fridge, there's fruit provided, there's those sort of normal things. But you tidy up after yourselves. You don't leave it for somebody else. So, and if somebody is unwilling or unable to buy into that, they won't like it. They really are not. That's not their cup of tea, and they will leave. You know, we don't have to hurry them out the door in any way, shape, or form. You know, they tend to not like the environment because they don't buy into it. I think I've just had had a thought. Often the community themselves are contributing to the events that we have.
Yeah.
So we have, for example, there's women in tech. There's Python as a programming language. There's a group called Python Ladies. There's roughly 20 ladies who are programmers. 2 of them happen to be in Dogpatch, and they organize monthly get-togethers because they have the same issues.
Yeah.
Career-wise, they have the same issues of not being accepted necessarily, finding it hard, etc. So, it's a support group as well as a technical transfer group, etc. And of course, they all feel comfortable. In a group of ladies, they're going to feel more comfortable to have those kind of conversations than if there's lads, but making fun or whatever, not taking things seriously. So, those kind of things happen. And so a lot of what we do is self-generated. If you've got good culture, that culture becomes self-reinforcing.
Yes.
And you then have that community then becomes self-reinforcing as well. We have to keep it warm. We have to make sure we rub off the rough edges. But actually, it's not that difficult to do if you start out very well. And that's been a big secret of Dogpatch, is the curation process of bringing the right people in has essentially just fed the flame and kept things improving, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very proud of Dogpatch. I think it's fantastic business.
And so you should be, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you are, in fact, a director.
I'm the chairman of it, yes. So
Yeah.
Patrick and I are essentially now, I'm a non-executive chairman. I'm not involved. There's a 10-man team that run the business, and I will help them as much as possible. And Patrick and I would generally tend to figure out the big decisions. Patrick's 31 years old. He hasn't run a business as complex as Dogpatch before. So nice for him to have somebody of my vintage who can come along and he can run an idea by, and I can go, yeah, brilliant, fire away. Or have you thought of this? Or actually, I've seen that tried elsewhere and it didn't work. But if we make this particular adjustment to it, we might have a chance because it's Dublin versus New York or whatever. So I guess I would be sort of an advisor as well.
And I think that's a really important thing for some people to take away, the fact that millennials and baby boomers can really work well together. We each bring things to the table, and this was definitely one of the things that interested me, was having the different generations involved, because of course I'm a boomer.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I haven't really touched on Neville's involvement here.
Yeah.
Neville is a very innovative person. While he had a very long corporate life, he was very, very innovative, not only in how he managed, but actually a lot of he was one of the ones, he was the man in charge when social media became a very, very big part of Coca-Cola marketing and advertising. And some of your viewers will remember the craze when they put Mentos into the bottles. Well, some people in Coca-Cola weren't very impressed with that, and they thought it sort of denigrated the brand. But he, I think, argued successfully that this was actually something that was cool and was getting attention, and it made Coke hip and trendy. And in this particular case, he was absolutely correct.
Okay. That
kind of trying to stop it from happening would have been very counterproductive.
Yeah.
So what they then started doing was encouraging people to try for records and to try to get bigger, not explosions, because that would be the wrong word to use. So we have to give him a huge amount of credit, because while I was the man on the spot in Dublin, and Patrick was obviously the driving force, especially on a day-to-day basis, Neville very, very quickly bought into the conceptual idea. And we actually have a wall of fame where when we have VIPs, you get to write your name. So we would have had a number of famous people, including our Taoiseach and including some other high-ranking politicians or entrepreneurs would have signed the Wall of Fame, and Neville has written his name, and underneath it, instead of saying CEO, Coke, or whatever, he has put entrepreneur underneath.
Yeah.
And he's right. He's right to have done that, you know. So without his undying support on this and belief in it as a way forward, Dogpatch would not exist.
Yeah.
So we have, you know, and he's in his mid-70s. Is he technically a boomer? 1943, I think. Would that be right?
I think so. Maybe just on the edge.
Yeah. So during the Second World War as opposed to after it. So in theory, somebody who in theory doesn't get this stuff, but I can assure you that that would be absolutely the opposite of the case.
Oh, definitely. I don't believe in age. I believe in open mind.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, being as smart as he is, and he sees the way the world works.
Yeah.
So no, but he's also very, very proud. And again, there is this, I used the phrase earlier, this green jersey, where we are happy to be part of something that is helping Irish companies, Irish startups, and the Irish venture capital scene, startup scene. We're doing our bit there as well. So that's very important for us.
It is, and again, you're really good with the segues here, because talking about that Irish heritage and putting so much of Ireland into what you do, that just guides us right in the door of the museum, because I think what I was struck by, and we'll talk about it more, but the museum is about the joy, the accomplishments, the value that the Irish have added all over the world. And I love the fact that it was so positive and uplifting. There are, you know, Billy the Kid, some fascinating individuals, but by and large, the tone is so positive. I think going forward, you've really hit on something that some other museums really need to take heed of, because that positivity invites you to become invested in each and every room that I went through. So with that said, I'm bouncing it back to you. Let's talk about EPIC.
Well, EPIC, I think the gestation of EPIC is an important piece of it. But back in 2013, 2014, we had a building and we had great unused spaces. So there was clearly a need to bring in something that was going to act as a destination creator for the building. The food solutions and the restaurants, etc., Dogpatch, have all done their piece, but they aren't the finish. They're not. We needed something. So, in the back of Neville and my mind, there's what can we do to solve that particular problem? And I started looking at things that interested me. Like I've got 4 kids, so a children's museum, possibly a technology museum. We looked at a literary museum. There's another one going up in Dublin, so that one, obviously, there's no point in having a fight. Yeah. And I'm going to give Neville huge credit. I need to tell you about his and my history.
Yes, please.
A little bit, because there is a bit of context creation there. But he said very early on, why don't we do something with respect to the diaspora? Yes. The Irish diaspora. And my initial instinct, even in conversation, was to be negative. I was worried that we would be only of interest to Irish American tourists, which would be a very, very small segment of the potential population. While we get a lot of Irish American tourists, I would have had to have every single one of them visit the museum.
Absolutely.
In order to make it viable. And that's not going to happen. Okay, so I was also worried that we use the word museum, and I'm not a museum goer necessarily. You know, that wouldn't be my necessarily number one priority in a strange city. And I had this vision of dusty artifacts and being bored as a child, etc., etc. So my instincts were negative, and to give credit to Neville. I'm the guy on the ground. So if both of us are not invested in something, it isn't going to really get legs and it's not going to happen productively. So he just left me alone on it. He came back to it once in a while, but he let me look for other alternatives. And I went down quite a long road on a number of occasions. And we were just never satisfied that there was something really compelling. Okay. What then happened was we found out through an acquaintance that the Irish Tourist Agency had been asked by the then Minister of Tourism, who's Leo Varadkar at the time, now Taoiseach, that they wanted to set up a national diaspora centre. So I did my job and I looked at it, even though I was thinking boring. But the feasibility study that I looked at excited me.
Okay.
Now, that feasibility study was put together by the people that have put the Titanic Belfast together, which, again, for those of you who don't know, is one of Ireland's top 2 or 3 visitor attractions. Currently the best visitor attraction in the world, I think, from travel awards, global travel awards, and attracts 600,000 to 700,000 people into Belfast, which is an unfashionable part of Ireland, every year, and is a massive success. And it's brilliantly designed, brilliantly managed, brilliantly executed, 5 years old. So my interest is starting to get peaked. And of course, because Neville had raised it, I didn't want to go back to him unless I had something concrete. Right. And I also was going to be told, I told you so, why did you listen? as big brothers would generally do. Yeah. So I spent a little bit of time looking at this particular feasibility study, and I threw it back at the person, the guy called Brian Donovan, who brought it to me. And I said, how do we take this feasibility study and make it interesting to Irish people?
Yeah.
How do we make it educational? How do we design it in such a way that you can keep it current? And I'll explain why that's important in a moment. Mm-hmm. How can you do it in such a way that we can actually build it quickly? Because assembling artifacts is painstaking. Yeah. And expensive, very expensive. And if you know what you want, you have to then go and find it. Then you have to buy it, especially if it's historic. So I was starting to get back some answers to these questions without necessarily going to the industry people. Okay, and when I wrote a number of sort of I guess expansions on this feasibility study, and Neville and I started getting quite excited because we thought that we had something that at least had legs, as I would say. Now, again, we just have to understand a little bit of history here, and it's our own personal history. So when Neville was 10, his parents emigrated from Northern Ireland. So he is by birth a Northern Irish Protestant. Okay, left to go to Central Africa in the mid-1950s, okay, where his father was a policeman and was taking up a big job in what was then Northern Rhodesia, to be head of the forensic services for the police in Northern Rhodesia. My birth father had been the man who had set that up. So my real father was the man who set that up in the first place. So in 1955, my dad and my mum, at that point, didn't have any children, met Meg Isdell, and Neville Isdell off the train. And so my dad handed over the role to Neville's father. Mm-hmm. And then my dad moved into a more general management job in the police. He was a forensic scientist or forensic policeman, CSI. Right. Famous for actually convicting somebody on a toe print, by the way.
Wow.
Of course, Africans didn't wear shoes, or not all Africans wore shoes. So impressions of feet were just as important as fingerprints.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, so that's just a small aside there. So Neville at 10 was this Irish boy living in Central Africa. Wow. A number of years later, I'm born, and I'm an Irish boy with Irish parents living in Central Africa. Two families, separate, obviously, and my parents would have come from Irish Catholic from Southern Ireland, Irish Catholic stock.
Yeah.
Cut a long story short, my dad died. My real dad died when I was very young. So Neville's dad and my mother married when I was small. So the two families got reunited, or united, I should say. And so I've always had this older brother, and he's always had two younger, much younger, messer, little rats, as he calls us, little brothers. Okay, so when he was in his early 20s, I'm a small boy. Okay,
Right.
so, but he was always fiercely proud to be Irish. And even before I went to school in Ireland, so primary and secondary school in Ireland as a boarder,
Right.
and I went to university in Ireland. But I was from Zambia. I was from Northern Rhodesia, Zambia. But I was proud to be Irish. Something was happening in our house, from my mother, from my dad when he was alive, and then from my stepfather and from Neville, where being Irish was important to us.
Right.
Neville then started working for Coca-Cola as a young man in Africa, and then went to Australia, went to the Philippines, went to Germany, went to Britain, went to Atlanta, worked all over the world. Never forgot for the next 45 years or so that he was Irish,
Yeah.
and in fact felt that being Irish was an advantage.
Yeah.
I worked in New York. I went to New York after I got out of college. I worked in London. I worked in South Africa, Southern Africa, I should say, Namibia, Australia, you name it. Again, independently felt. You ask somebody, I don't have an Irish accent. People say, where are you from? I say, I'm Irish. They smile at you.
Yeah.
They relax. They visibly relax in front of you. That wouldn't necessarily happen if you said I'm English or I'm German or if I'm Swiss or I'm Japanese, That would not necessarily happen. There is something about the global reputation the Irish have that makes people, vast majority, not everybody clearly, but the vast majority of people drop their guard a little bit and have a chat, have a conversation, ask questions. Oh, do you know Mrs. O'Flaherty? From, etc. I mean, if you've got, so this is, a lot of people will be listening to this and they will be nodding in agreement.
Yeah.
Because that is how it works. Also, if you can be Irish American, now you can be Italian American, but how many Norwegian Americans are there? How many German Americans are there? How many Welsh Americans? There are a number of nationalities that hang on. Italians are very good example, very similar, where people hang on generation after generation to some semblance of that nationality. What you intro today said, I'm partly Irish.
Yep.
Even if it's only 10%, it's the bit that people know about. It's amazing. It really is amazing. And Neville felt this very, very strongly. And when he had been thinking about it for a number of years. And when he enunciated it in conversations with me and with the other people, it was very, very clear that we were onto something.
Yeah.
We had something that if we could essentially display or exhibit what he was talking about there, that we had something that would be a very, very big interest. And I want this to be, you are the core customer. You are a person who's visiting Ireland, you like Ireland, and you have Irish heritage, so you are our natural customer.
Yeah.
But if you are on a Ryanair weekend from Paris, and you're with your wife or girlfriend or vice versa, I want you to be interested to come in and learn about that element of Irishness, even though you don't have an Irish bone in your body. And you made a very, very important point. You said, go to Epic first.
Yes.
And we are starting to realize, it wasn't part of the design, we are starting to realize that it is a fantastic primer.
Yeah.
For people who don't really know a lot about Ireland, a lot about Irish history, a lot about where the Irish are coming from and why we think the way we do, Epic will open some of those doors. Not all, but some of those doors. We are very, very broad, and therefore, because of that, we are very, very shallow. There's not a huge amount of depth in any one area. But if you're interested, there are other places in Dublin or in other parts of the world where you can go into more depth. And what we're trying to do is to give EPIC is really trying to give an idea of what Irishness means and the contribution that those who have considered themselves Irish in some way, small in some cases, have made all over the world.
Yeah.
And I've learned enormous amounts. Argentina.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of thousands of people who are Argentinian Irish. I never knew. I never knew there was a massive influx of Irish into the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And, you know, we feature, and we smile a little bit when we talk about her, we feature Rihanna.
Yeah.
Okay. Her real name is Robin Fenty. You know, her ancestors came over from Ireland in the late 1600s, early 1700s.
Yeah.
But if you know, her name is an Irish name, and there are you can look at pictures of people in Barbados, and you can see Irishness among the features. I don't know how much they feel Irish generally themselves, but she calls her perfume Fenty, for example.
Yeah.
So it must be important, and so she's multi-generational.
Yeah.
Away, but there's still an element of Irishness in how the Barbadians, you know, there are still groups of Barbadians who, you go to various places in Barbados, there are Irish accents. It's astonishing. It really is amazing. You know, now obviously, you know, 10, 15 generations, a lot of the cultural habits rub off, but it's important. So just to give you an idea, the museum is about 40,000 square feet, which makes it quite large. It was designed to have what is called a dwell time of 90 minutes.
Okay.
The vast majority of people spend more time than that. Our record is 2 whole days by an American couple who were determined to read and listen to every word.
Wow.
So, and I was asked whether we would honor their ticket for the second day, and I said absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, we have a policy where you can leave halfway through, go and get a cup of coffee in one of our restaurants or cafes, and then you can come back in. So you can have your lunch and you can go back in if you have the time to do that. And we have quite a large number of people who do that, especially locals, who are trying, you know, we've just launched a membership scheme because there are people who are coming back 6th or 7th time. And I don't want to charge them whatever the fee would be. An old age pension is €12, which is really a bargain for a day's entertainment. Yeah. So, you know, we now have a membership scheme where I think for the price of 3 entries, you can come 100 times a year if you want to.
Wow.
So, right. And rightly so. The zoo do this, you know, places that we have there's a taxi driver who loves it and who brings he actually comes with his fares and he takes them into Epic because he is so determined to show off Epic to his fares. When they say, is there anything decent to do in Dublin? He says, I'm taking you to Epic. Oh, I'm going to take you in myself, etc.
Oh, that's so cool.
We have a number of people who are like that. There's one old lady who I've been introduced to, and she has about 12 grandchildren, and she takes them one by one on their birthday to Epic.
Oh, wow. So
the treat is to go to Epic with Granny on your birthday or as close to your birthday as possible. So isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
The response we're getting from kids, you know, we actually about a third of the people that go through Epic, we get some feedback from them. And the feedback from kids, because it's so interactive, what I haven't explained well here, and I apologize, is it's mostly digital. It's mostly interactive and immersive. And we're using some very, very cool touchscreen technologies. We have giant iPads. And so if you can read, and if you can use a touchpad, you are in business. So kids from 5 or 6 onwards love it. You get a passport as you go in, and there's an opportunity in each of the 20 galleries to stamp your passport. And of course, that becomes a bit of a competition for the kids, and sometimes a bit of a nightmare.
Well, you did say to me, you do school tours as well, and they have to answer questions, I think you said, in order to get their passport stamped.
Yes, correct. So we have a panel of teachers who help us to design the kids programs. The kids are competitive. They like being asked questions. They like having to go and figure stuff out. So in each gallery, there's 3 or 4 questions they have to answer. In order to answer the question, they have to go and investigate. Yeah. And of course, they know how to, more so than my generation necessarily. They're very, very good with this touchscreen technology.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very fast to do it. I think, let me just give your listeners and viewers a bit of an overview. There are 4 sections to it. There's 20 galleries in total. There's the passport gallery where it's explained to you how it works and you get your passport, which actually doubles as a map as well.
Yeah.
The first 3 galleries explore the themes of the island you have left behind. So it's mostly imagery of Ireland, and it's introducing people to the concept of leaving, and also that each of these was a person with hopes, aspirations, a career, a future career in some cases. They could have been a soldier, they could have been a lawyer, they could have been a housewife, they could have been a missionary, it could have been somebody escaping persecution, homophobic persecution or religious persecution, for example. So the second gallery is a fantastic sculpture where all of the modes of transport, and we tell the story of where people left in a chronological way, essentially. The third gallery is what I call the arrivals hall of Ellis Island. Yeah. It's a mock-up of Ellis where people would be queuing up to be processed at the immigration desks. And there are 6 stories told over the course of about 250 years of various people, and they're real-life people. We have actors who are telling the individual stories. And in most cases, somebody will, it could have been somebody who left Ireland to go and work as a labourer when building Britain in the 1950s. There were hundreds of thousands of men working in Britain, Irish labourers. I have 2 uncles who did that. There's a lady who escaped the Northern Irish Troubles in the 1990s, went to Canada. And then, of course, there was some more back in history, including Annie Moore, who was the first person who arrived at Ellis Island. She happened to be the first person off the first ship, and she happened to be from Cork. So we tell her story too. But all the others are not famous. They are just ordinary people with amazing stories, but they're ordinary stories. The next 4 galleries are called the motivation galleries. Motivation, essentially, why people left. And in some cases, it was through choice. I was a good example. I emigrated in 1983. Ireland was not booming. I had a very good maths and engineering degree, and they were looking for people in financial services in New York who had that quantitative background. Why would I not go? I learned so much. You know, I worked for a company called Morgan Stanley, learned more in 5 years in New York than I would in 10 years anywhere else. And true to American companies, they give you responsibility if you're able to handle it.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to be a time server. In the early 80s, you kind of had to be more patient than you might have been today. But not in New York, not in Wall Street. So the 4 galleries there are Belief, which examines vocational people, educators, missionaries, social workers. Ireland, very, very strong in terms of our vocational immigration. We are the biggest charity givers per capita in the world, apparently. There's a soft heart there. Yeah. Probably historic, probably going for the underdog, etc., and contributing. But there are dozens and dozens of people, ranging from Columbanus in the early 500 ADs to Ebola nurses in Sierra Leone today, who are essentially fighting that, at the vanguard of that fight. For example, Irish nurses, known the world over, incredibly well educated, and it's a vocational. Yeah. It's almost a missionary role if you're a nurse. Yeah. Mostly women, but a good smattering of men involved there too. Again, my dad was the youngest of 10. I have two uncles who were nurses, one of whom was the chief nurse in Britain at one point.
Oh, wow.
Very good example. Obviously got their training in the Second World War. Yeah. The second gallery there after that is called Conflict, and that essentially examines those who left Ireland to fight for other people. 1601 was the Battle of Kinsale. It was the last time we had an Irish army until 1922. The Irish essentially then fought for everybody, and sometimes Battle of Waterloo, there would have been Irish brigades fighting for France against British, I'm going to say British soldiers, of whom roughly 30% were actually Irish, commanded by an Irishman who was at the time Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. He was Irish. He was born in Dublin. Became a future Prime Minister of Great Britain, obviously. So, I mean, the Irish contribution just to the Battle of Waterloo, which I suspect is on a par with, I guess, D-Day in terms of importance in that century, at least. The next gallery is what we call the Rule of Law Gallery, and that is where legislation caused people to leave.
Yes.
So, for example, we've had a rollback. We were very, very conservative with social legislation.
Yes.
So a lot of gay people would have left Ireland and would not have been comfortable in an Irish society, went to London, went to Sydney, went to San Francisco, went to New York, where there were larger, more comfortable groupings of like-minded people. So there's a good example. We cover that. We cover the Mandolin laundries. We cover some unsavory elements.
Yes.
And negative elements. We don't make judgments. We just tell what happened.
Yeah.
Okay? And we've gotten very, very good reviews from the historians and from some of the church, the prelates and the bishops, etc., because we're essentially telling it like it was, as opposed to coming out on either side.
Yes, yes.
So in theory, the designers at this point, if you've been paying attention and you've been spending some time in there, you're actually going to be a little bit depressed because it's a bit doomy and gloomy and a little bit, don't know what the right word is, but there's quite a lot of negative information there. Some of it, the famine stories, people leaving.
It taps your heart.
Yes, and we've had some emotional, some people getting emotional, and our staff, who are very good, are very quick to spot when we've had one lady who had 4 kids in Australia, got very, very upset because, of course, all of her hurt came tumbling back that her kids had to leave as she saw it. So there is an element, there's a lot of history in here, and we do tell individual stories, but there isn't necessarily a celebration of those stories. It's more information provision.
Yeah.
But then you go into the second part, which you alluded to very, very sweetly earlier, which is sort of what we call the influence galleries.
Yes.
And we talk about roughly 350 people. We do it in a thematic way. Sports, technology, innovation, business, literature, absolutely. Art and design, food and drink. There's a whole host of things there that it's done thematically as opposed to chronologically, and we celebrate roughly 700 people. 350, very close to 350 are covered in reasonable amount of detail.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very proud to say that roughly a quarter of those are from the province of Ulster.
Oh.
So there is no boundary. We don't have a border. You're Irish. You're from the island of Ireland.
Yeah.
Easy. You have to, in most cases, you have to have acknowledged your Irishness.
Yes.
So even if now, and we've got a couple in there like Barack Obama, the Irishness is quite tenuous and a long way back.
Yeah.
But he's very quick to acknowledge it. I have to give credit for that. He was very quick to acknowledge it. And interestingly, for those of us in Southern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, people revere John F. Kennedy as the first Irish American president.
I'm one of those people.
Absolutely, but in fact, he was about the 19th.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there was a whole raft of American presidents who were descended from Northern Irish Presbyterian and Protestant stock, starting with Andrew Jackson.
Yeah.
Andrew Jackson was born in America 2 years after his parents emigrated from Armagh in Northern Ireland. So in fact, the reality is that he was the first truly Irish-American president, but of course not necessarily fated in the south of the country because, of course, John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic. To become, yes. So, and again, we don't necessarily make those kind of judgment calls. No. We're not in the process of telling you what we think. We're telling you more or less what happened. So there's an one other thing, roughly 22% of the people we cover are women. We had a pretty tough time getting it over the 20% because before 1850, the percentage is minuscule.
Yeah.
But we have done our best. I have 2 daughters. We would certainly, in places like Dogpatch and in Neville's career and in my own career, we would have had my own career obviously nowhere quite as extravagant as his, but we would have always had a diversity agenda. So we pushed very, very hard to maximize the number of women so that when you go into the technology gallery or you go into the art and design or the storytelling gallery, there are female role models or heroines that you don't have to be a girl to look up to them, but if you are, it will help. So it's not a male-oriented or dominated. It is male-dominated because it's 80-20 or 78-22, but we have absolutely done our best. And we recently added some names to our rugby table because the Rugby World Cup bid about to be announced. So we managed to find 3 female rugby players who were Irish descent, who had actually made a big impact on rugby in their country. One was in America, and one was in Canada. So that was very, very important for us to be able to do, I have to say. So the Northern Irish thing, Neville was always very, very careful to make sure, being of Northern Irish extraction himself, very, very, how are we doing in Ulster? How are we doing in Ulster? Have you got enough from Ulster? What about this fellow? What about, because people in the North are just as proud of their ancestry and what their influential people have done as we are in the South. So you then go through each of these galleries, as we said, there's a fantastic storytelling literature one. Oh yeah. And very nice technology. There's a lot of movie stars. You know, we've certainly batted above our weight. We're trying to introduce Saoirse Ronan. Yes. Yes, and partly because of, so this is one of the beauties of being digital, is it's not that difficult for us to include another clip in our cinema area. So we can just include, we'll probably have to shorten one of the other clips perhaps just to include it, but we can include her quite easily. So one of the museum team is working on research and getting a clip, hopefully for relatively low money. Some of the royalty fees or the license fees for these clips are amazingly expensive. We just have to cut our cloth. The last 2 galleries, the main one celebrates St. Patrick's Day all around the world, and also the Milwaukee Festival, which is the biggest Irish music festival in the world, interestingly. And so we have footage of that for people to enjoy. And then in the last gallery, we have what we call diaspora today, and that's actually a work in progress. There's a way for you to use your passport to communicate, send a postcard, which is very clever, and a bit of what the Irish would call a bit of crack. Yeah. Okay. That means fun, by the way. Yeah. So, and we're starting to work with some of the social media companies and some of the other companies, because postcards, I'm talking to you via a video link, but Skype is the new postcard. Skype is the new letter home. Yeah. It's easy enough for us to collect postcards, to collect letters, to display them as part of diaspora communication. Yeah. Excuse me. Facebook is another one now. And the Twitter wall was phenomenal. Yes, exactly. Yes. So we've got an opportunity now to work with some of these social media companies and to get them to help us to put some technology into that area so that we can essentially expand what we offer and bring it up to date, because the diaspora is talking to itself and home using technology nowadays, rather than writing 14-page letters, which is when I was in boarding school. You know, I was writing, "Take me home, I don't like it here, Mom," etc., etc. Don't get me. Exactly, yeah. So I think that's very interesting. We have a shop upstairs. There's a very, very important thing I must mention, which is our genealogy center, which is called the Irish Family History Center. anybody who has Anglo-Saxon roots, not just Celtic, not just Irish. If you have British or French, German won't be covered, but if you have Anglo-Saxon, British, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, North American, Canadian, if you come from that sort of background from a genealogy perspective, there's staff there that can help you, show you how to use a database, do some research. And if you get really, really interested, they will actually do some research for you as well, which is obviously it's a commercial arrangement, but there's a very, very cheap entry-level thing that you can do a lot of the research yourself. Very, very important. We had a visit from the Prime Minister of Canada recently, Justin Trudeau. Yep. We managed to get his maternal line traced back to County Cork.
Yeah, his mother's a Sinclair.
That's right.
Yeah.
1661. We managed to get some documentation. We got a birth certificate for a Sinclair.
Wow.
From 1661. And we also got that same person's graduation certificate from Trinity College in, I'm going to say, 1680, something like that. Yeah. Or 1682, I think, from memory, I think. He had taken 6 years to do a 2-year degree. So, of course, that was remarked to Justin as part of the presentation. And he said, "Oh, a typical Trudeau." Yeah. That was very, very funny. We are a number of things just for your viewers. We're the highest rated, so star rating, visitor attraction in Dublin and in Ireland on TripAdvisor. We still don't have the volumes we're going to get in the future. As you say, it takes a while to warm up and to get everybody to start recommending. So that's important. We are now, I think it's fair to say that if we have VIPs coming over to visit the government, they are asking us whether we can accommodate them on a trip or tour. So there's a pride with the government and some of the tourism agencies that they would utilize Epic as part of the entertainment. And clearly there's a explanation, there's sort of an understanding of Ireland that is gleaned from people when they come in. So that's important. The schools are going absolutely bananas. We are inundated with requests for school trips. Our active retirement, we're starting to corner the active retirement market because, of course, these are people who all have have emigrated, their kids, their cousins, their brothers, their sisters. So they all have a personal story to tell, as well as an interest in the area. So I think very happy, fantastic team that runs Epic on a day-to-day basis. They're amazing. Mostly ladies, interestingly. Obviously, it's hospitality and it's tourism, which is in Ireland quite a female-dominated business. Interesting. Yes. I think it's an interesting phenomenon. Not one I was very knowledgeable about, but we're learning quickly. Yeah. And very, very happy with progress so far, I have to say, and reactions of people like you.
Well, I think, thank you for leading us through the museum. I just want to add to that because it is so phenomenal. You are so immersed. The floor, the ceiling, the walls, all of the interactivity is built in and around. There is something to see all around you. And all of the pieces, to me, were so beautifully thought out. The room with all the bookshelves and the big table that even had horse racing on it. My grandmother would have absolutely loved that. It was just so, I didn't know where to look first. And there's nowhere that you don't have a feast for the senses. It's not just about digital. It's not just about learning things. It's just an absolute visual feast, and there's so so many different elements that are so much more than even what you're saying. I hadn't intended to become such an evangelist, but I don't think there's one person I've spoken to since I have come home that I have not told about the museum.
We'll have to give you a sales commission, it sounds like.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's interesting. I have to say, I really appreciate your comments. I think, and I know they're sincere from having spent time with you. I think you're right. Now, I'm going to be a little bit negative because there are areas of the place that I want to improve, and we're starting to do that, you know. So I don't think it's a bad thing to never be truly 100% satisfied, especially with the digital museum, because there's a couple of actors that we need to include. There's a man who's just won, yesterday or over the weekend, I think, an Irish American lady won the New York City Marathon for the first time in 40 years. Right. Okay? So we now have somebody researching her now. And I like the fact that it's a lady here as well, because that just gives us another excuse to add another lady, which is fantastic, you know, and that's a fantastic story. Because obviously, you know, it's 40 years since an American person won the New York City Marathon. Yeah. That's an astonishing achievement. So we will continue to improve it. I'm a little worried about putting in too much new stuff, because then we will have problems in due course when we get large numbers of people. If everyone's taking 3 hours to get through, I won't be able to manage everybody that wants to see it. So I have to be clever about if we add something, we probably have to shorten something. You know, a little bit. But I've got an amazing team who look after the content side of it, both the research side of it and also the look and feel. And as I said, you know, we have a daily. I get forwarded from sales and marketing emails with another company signing up to send us more and more people, etc. You know, I had one yesterday. I had two yesterday and one today. So these are large numbers of people as well. We're talking, you know, hundreds a week of extra people who are going to come. So I think I'm just trying to, at the moment, it's very, very good time to come, because when we don't have huge crowds, we do have the odd peak here and there, especially, you know, 11 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We sometimes get small queues, or if there's 3 or 4 school groups or an active retirement group overlapping with the school group, we sometimes have to manage that slightly. You know, you got lots and lots of 10-year-olds running around with people in wheelchairs, not a good mix necessarily, but obviously we plan for that in advance. Yeah. So no, I'm very, very happy. You know, Neville, a number of things I think just for you is we had a different expert on each gallery.
Oh, okay.
And they had quite a lot of input into the look and feel of the design. So you're right that the design had some macro similarities. But if you think back, each of the galleries is actually physically different.
Very different.
So everything was sort of designed by a company. I'll give them a shout out. They're a company called Event Communications, founded by an Irish lady. Okay? They are probably the world's best museum and exhibition design company. Wow. They did Titanic, they did Epic. Yeah. So 2 of the more successful, more recent ones. A lot of work in the Middle East, where there's an enormous growth in museums and visitor attractions as these Middle Eastern countries are getting to grips with their cultural history and heritage. Boy, do they have a lot of that. You know, you can imagine. So Event did an amazing job. There were 2 or 3 Irish people who got the stories and understood the story, and they were the key people in terms of the overall design. It's an amazing piece of work. Oh, yeah. And as you said, we will now take it forward relatively slowly. At the moment, we want to build up the numbers. Yeah. We don't necessarily have to change the content unless I want to keep it up to date. So Saoirse Ronan will go in. Yes. Michael Fassbender will go in. There's a couple of other people who are topical, who have reached world-class status, like this lady who won the marathon. So we'll continue to just add the odd person here or there, so that my 11-year-old, when they go through, will see Rhiannon, or will see Joshua, and will get somebody that they will have heard of, as opposed to, let's say, Maureen O'Hara, who might be lost on them. But obviously, my generation would remember her very well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Neville, the point I was going to make was Neville had an enormous part to play in the strategic direction that we took here. And he gave me the opportunity to, the mantra was, it has to be world class.
Yeah.
Full stop. And that was pushed by him every opportunity he got, and easy enough for me to then repeat when we were dealing with this operationally and the design and the day-to-day. It has to be world class. That was how we approached it. That is how we currently approach it. And I think you'll agree that we've hit the nail on the head, and I will continue to do my level best to even upgrade it so that we go up another notch as well going forward.
Well, I think it's absolutely perfect as it is. Whatever you add will just be an incredible bonus. And what I want to say to anybody who's watching, who's been there, go on Twitter, #EpicMuseum. Let us know when you were there. Better yet, let us know when you're going, because I think every single buddy who watches this show or hears about Epic Museum needs to go. The Epic Emigration Museum is absolutely world class. There's no doubt about that in my mind.
Well, thank you very much indeed. You're very kind. Yeah.
Mervyn, I thank you so much. This has been Mervyn Greene, my guest. He is head of CHQ. Mervyn and his brother Neville have done Ireland an amazing service in putting together the Epic Emigration Museum and housing Dogpatch Labs, and of course this incredible heritage site that you really have to see to believe. Thanks very much. I'm Elaine Lindsay of True Social Media and the host of BBPTV. I'll see you on the next show. Bye for now.